I want to encourage you to take your Bibles, open with me to Psalm 77. We're going to look at verses 1 through 15 this morning, Psalm 77. We're in week number 4 of our summer series. We've entitled The Gospel Overcoming, and the purpose of this series is to help us take a look at some common human struggles, but do so through this biblical lens in hope of convincing us of the sufficiency of the Scriptures and that Jesus is the answer for that which is troubling you. That's what I hope in a big picture kind of sense you come away with by the time this summer is over. Jesus is enough, and the Bible speaks to the struggles that we're walking through. I want to remind you, as we do every week, of the premise statement. This truth, binding together all these separate messages, is this. Went too far. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the most transforming force for good in the universe. As such, it is the fundamental answer to humanity's fundamental problems. There is therefore no struggle it cannot overcome, no hurt it cannot heal, and no regret it cannot redeem. Now, I think about this week's message, I think about next week's message with the gospel overcoming grief, and I think of all the topics that we're looking at this summer. These two may stress our willingness to believe that statement. I hope by the time we're done, you can say yes and amen to it. This morning, again, we're talking about the gospel overcoming chronic pain. And I'm not going to define pain for you, because my experience and that which as I read about pain would be affirmed. The experience of pain is too subjective to try to nail down a definite definition of it. We all experience pain based on all kinds of different criteria, right? Our family background, so on and so forth. There's a lot that goes into it. I'll just touch on it a little bit later. But I don't need to define pain for you, because you all know what it is already. What I do want to do this morning by way of foundation is draw a line between what is known as acute pain and what is known as chronic pain. Acute pain is often unexpected, sudden kind of pain, all right, but it's also often identifiable, right? The pain may have come out of nowhere, but you know the source of it. And by definition, acute pain is temporary, right? Acute pain doesn't last. So think about acute pain this way. It's like stubbing your big toe, right? You're walking through your living room. Maybe you're getting ready for bed. You've already turned out all the lights because you think you know where the coffee table is, because that's where it always is. And somewhere throughout the day, it got moved. And in the dark, bam, you whack your big toe into the coffee table and you jam it in, and you are immediately one big toe, right? Your whole body is one giant big toe, and you are feeling that pain everywhere, right? From top to bottom and from left to right. That's acute pain. But you can identify the source of that pain. It's that table, right? And the table got moved, or you forgot where the table was, right? And you also recognize that it's temporary, right? Nobody, when they stub their toe, is thinking to themselves, oh my word, life as I knew it is now over. Unless you're like super dramatic, right? Which you may be. But typically we don't have those thoughts with acute pain, because we recognize it hurts now, but I'll wake up tomorrow and it probably will be better, because I've stubbed my toe before, and when I woke up the next day, it was okay, right? Chronic pain is different than that. Chronic pain would be defined as consistent pain experienced every day for at least 3 months in a row. That's chronic pain. And it's estimated that between 25 and 50 million Americans live with some level of chronic pain, again, by definition, every day or just about every day. And the reason why there's such a broad spectrum, 25 to 50 million, I mean, that's a 25 million person spread. The reason why there's such a spread there in that statistic is because a lot of people who struggle with chronic pain, they don't advertise it. They don't talk about it with people. And there could be folks sitting right here in this room right now, certainly folks watching on the live stream right now, who you experience chronic pain, and yet the people around you would never know it, because by looking at you, it'd be hard to tell. You might still have a smile on your face. You may still be trying to endure and do your normal job and live your normal life and so on, but inside, right, you know the storm that is raging in you by way of the pain that you're experiencing. The common mistake then that people have when it comes to understanding chronic pain is they think because they've experienced acute pain, they understand what it's like to experience chronic pain, right? It's the mistake that says, because I stubbed my toe, I know what it's like for you to be in chronic pain every day for 3 months, 3 years, or 30 years, because I know what pain is like. But those two kinds of pain, listen, are not alike. They are not alike. And the big thing that separates them is the expectation that with acute pain, it's going to go away. With chronic pain, you may not have that same expectation. And when we make that mistake of thinking that we understand chronic pain because we've been through acute pain, it just frustrates everybody involved. I will confess to you this morning, I've never experienced chronic pain. Never. But I live with a wife for the past 28 years who does. And I was raised by a mom who all of my life lived with chronic, unrelenting pain. Who, as one person said it, right, it's that experience of having bad days and good bad days. That was my mom's life. And so the mistake I make is thinking I understand Michelle's experience because I've stubbed my toe. But here's the problem, right? When a person has a cast on, we get that. That's a marker of pain. When a person has stitches in, we get that. That's a marker of pain. But with chronic pain, there may not be those outward indicators that pain exists. And so it's really easy, right, as a person not going through that, to think things like, are we still dealing with this? I mean, you're not over it yet? I mean, come on, can't you just do it? Can't you just, it's that frustration of, Michelle and I, right, we're on vacation and I just want to see stuff and, I like to learn on vacation. My family hates to learn on vacation, but for me that means museums and stuff. And she'll be like, can you please slow down? I can't keep up with you. And I'm like, if I walk any slower, I might as well just stand still. That's not her fault. That's my fault. But it leads to frustration on her side as well, because what does she think? You're not even listening to me. It's like you're not even trying to understand what I'm going through, right? And so we make that mistake, and it just leads to all kinds of frustration. Chronic pain can come on gradually, right? A lot of people who experience everyday kind of pain, it didn't start out that way. It started out in fits and spurts. Here a bad day, and then it went away, and then another bad day, and so on and so forth. It can go on indefinitely, right? Maybe it will last another month, but it could be part of your life for the rest of your life, right? So it could go on indefinitely. It could have multiple causes that can be really hard to diagnose. I mean, a lot of people who struggle with chronic pain, they've had doctor's appointments where a doctor looks at them and says, we think you have this disease, but we can't really know for sure right now, so you just have to go home and get sicker, and then once you get sick enough, maybe then we can diagnose your problem and be able to help you. And so what kind of news is that to walk out of the doctor's office, right, where you hope to get good news, and what you're left with instead of, you just need to go and let whatever's happening continue to progress and get sicker, and maybe we can then help you. And then you get to that point where even if they can identify the source of your chronic pain, there are very few, if any, effective treatments to relieve that pain. That's the experience of chronic pain. And it can beat upon a person like waves on a rock, right? With that same eroding kind of effect, right? Like beating upon their joy, beating upon their sense of self, beating upon their sense of purpose, beating upon their faith, right? Beating upon their belief in the promises of God, and all these things. It just lands on them over and over and over again, day after unrelenting day of this painful condition. One author that I read said this: acute pain attacks your health, chronic pain attacks your sense of self. That's what we're talking about here today. That unrelenting pain that just attacks your sense of self. One caveat before we get into the text that I just need to say: when I talk about the gospel overcoming chronic pain, I am not talking in any way about the absence of pain. This is not a health, wealth, prosperity church. We don't buy into that abomination, right? That twisting of Scripture that says God is in heaven, sitting on his judgmental throne, right? And he's got a faith meter, and he's willing to heal you. He's willing to take away your pain once you reach enough faith, and he's rooting for you. But if you don't get there, then you're just going to have to live with it. And it's your fault. That is a lie. That is a lie. God's purpose and plan for your life might include a lifetime of pain. So when we talk about the gospel overcoming chronic pain, we're not talking about the absence of pain. What we're talking about is a mental disposition. We're talking about a spiritual disposition that allows you to interpret your chronic pain in such a way that you walk through it with a sense of hope, a sense of expectation, holding on to your faith in God and the promises of God and the accomplishments of the gospel, so that you experience it as an overcomer, as more than a conqueror, as a victor. And so that when you do finally cross that threshold of faith, or threshold of death, I should say, you do it hanging on to your faith with your head up like a champion. Even if you just spent the last 6 months of your natural life puking because of chemotherapy. That's what we're talking about today. So, Psalm 77. We're going to look at verses 1 through 15. The psalm is a little bit longer than that, and there's 4 movements to it. Each of the movements of the psalm are separated by the word Selah. Now, in the original writing, that was a musical connotation to signal to the singers and the people in the worship team that they needed to change something. But for us, it's just an opportunity to breathe, right? It just separates the psalm. And we're going to look at the first 3 movements. The fourth is very much related to the third, so we'll look at the first 3 for time's sake. The psalmist begins this way: I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. Selah. You hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Selah. Then I said, I will appeal to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I'll remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. You, with your arm, redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. I would suggest to you that this is the common experience in the psalm of so many people who struggle with chronic pain. Dr. Craig Svensson, who is a PhD professor at Purdue University, which is right outside the campus of Faith Church in Lafayette, Indiana, where we go for the Biblical Counseling Training Conference. He was one of the speakers in Track 4 and wrote a book about chronic pain. He himself suffers chronic pain through multiple conditions, and he said this: we may admire those who do not flinch in the face of suffering, but we should not judge those who wobble when affliction strikes. When I read this psalm, I think about a Rocky movie. And that this psalm is Rocky in the big title fight, right, that always comes at the end of the movie. If you've never seen the Rocky movies, you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to go home, repent of your grievous sin, and watch the Rocky movies, right? But you'll do some push-ups, you'll feel good about yourself, right? You'll be pumped. But Rocky's opponents, right, Clubber Lang, Ivan Drago, when they do the video montage that always happens, right, in the movies, where they're working their way up to the title fight, they destroy all their opponents, right? I mean, they don't even break a sweat. They're just wrecking people. Well, that has to be that way, right? Because Rocky, even though he's the champ, always has to go into the fight as the underdog, right? There has to be that tension. And so when you get to that big title fight, you see Rocky, right? He's standing strong, right? They're going toe-to-toe, but eventually you know he's going to get rocked, right? And it's always the slow motion, very dramatic, right? You see the skin on his face just wobble because he took one on the cheek there, and then he goes down in slow motion. His body just bounces a few times, and right, he took one on the button, and he's down on the canvas. But then what happens, right? He's down, but he's not out. He claws his way back up, and in the end, he comes out victorious. I just read this psalm, I think that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Notice in verses 1 through 3, he starts out well. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying, right? I mean, he's in the fight. He's in there, right? He's crying out to the Lord. My soul refuses to be comforted. The idea, until he gets his answers, he's not going to stop. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate on God, my spirit faints. Asaph is obviously going through some stuff here, and we don't know. He doesn't tell us right in the introduction what he's going through, but he's obviously going through some stuff right now, and it's taking its toll on him, but he's trying to do the right thing, isn't he? Right? Verse 1, twice he says, I cry aloud to God. Twice he says that. Why? Because he's trying to emphasize he's crying aloud to God. And he's doing so with the expectation that God is actually going to hear him, right? He's hearing him. He's hearing his prayers. He's hearing these cries. But then things take a really unexpected turn by the time we get to verse 3, because we get to verse 3, what we would expect Asaph to say is that when I remember God, I rejoice. When I remember God, I give thanks. When I remember God, I worship, right? When I remember God, I lift my hands in the air and I give praise to his glorious name because he's such an awesome God, but that's not what he says. My pastoral experience, though, would say that most Christians believe that that's how we're supposed to respond to our pain. And I don't know when it happened. I don't know who first taught it, at what point along the way, but somehow Christians came to this false belief that they're supposed to pretend that their pain doesn't hurt. And I've sat in hospital rooms, ICU rooms, people's living rooms, my church office here, talking with people who are in obviously difficult circumstances, right? They're obviously in a lot of physical pain or maybe it's mental distress, whatever the case may be. They're obviously going through it, and they want me to believe that they're okay, it's all right, I'm fine, it doesn't really hurt, and so on. And they're trying to put on that plastic face, they're trying to put on that smile, that stiff upper lip, and they're trying to pretend their pain doesn't actually hurt them. And listen, you can just see the weight just kind of roll off their shoulder. I mean, you can literally see people's countenance change when you say to them, listen, it's okay to not be okay. What you're going through hurts. It's all right to acknowledge that it hurts. And you can just see them, they're like, What's Asaph's response? When I think about God, I moan. When I meditate on God, my spirit faints. What's he saying? I just want to quit. I'm just going to tap out. I'm just going to throw in the towel. Why would he get there? Because listen, maybe if you've never experienced chronic pain, maybe you've never got to this point. But if you've never got to this point, I would say it's probably because you just haven't hurt bad enough long enough. You can get to the point where you think, why bother praying? It doesn't work. God's not listening, or he's not going to heal me, because I've been praying for 6 months. I've been praying for 6 years. I've been praying for 60 years. And listen, the thought that God doesn't care about your pain can be more painful than the pain. And so he says, my spirit faints. Again, I said in the introduction, there's a lot that goes into how one experiences their pain, right? There are cultural foundations that say this is how we deal with pain in this culture, right? There's biology. Some people have a higher pain threshold. Some people have a lower pain threshold. For some people, expectation plays a great deal into how they experience their pain. By that I mean, if you know that the experience you're going to go through is going to be painful, that can often be really helpful for you when you're experiencing that pain. But if the pain comes out of nowhere and you didn't have time to mentally prepare for it, it can make the pain more painful than it might have been. And then the example that others in authority, others that you love, others that you respect, have set for you when it comes to experiencing pain can go a long way in how you then experience your pain. But I think the thing that we all need to wrestle with when it comes to chronic pain, like the rest of life, is pain is not primarily experienced through the skin. Pain is primarily experienced through the heart. You should write that down. That's really important. Pain is primarily experienced through the heart. By that I mean, how we interpret our pain, how we respond to our pain is shaped by what we're wanting, not just by what we're going through. but the desires of our heart. And so if what you want is to be safe and comfortable and in control and free of pain more than you want to glorify God, it's going to make your experience of pain more painful than it might have been. Likewise, if your experience of pain is rooted in the fact that you're desperately trying to hang on to a version of the future that you have created in your mind for yourself, and God may be trying to take that version of the future from you, and He's got to rip it from your hands, that can make your experience of pain more painful than it might have otherwise been. You know what I'm talking about there, don't you? Right? That we all have this version of our future that we've built for ourselves that includes we're going to work hard, we're going to retire early, we're going to vacation 3 or 4 times a year, we're going to have, the RV, we're going to travel, we're going to see the world, we're going to be in good health until the night we go to bed, and then we're going to slip quietly into eternity in our sleep. And God may be trying to, through the experience of chronic pain, might be trying to wrest that version of the future that may have existed in your mind for you, but never existed in His mind. And if you're intent on hanging on to it, it will make that experience of pain more painful than it otherwise might have been. And listen, when I get it, when you're in the middle of it, your natural response is to moan. And that's true for acute pain as well as it is for chronic pain. I think about my eye surgery. I had my left eye done. I'm going to have my right one done in the middle of August. Just encourage you to be, praying for that. I don't read my Bible anymore. I read off of this because I can't see that at this point. But I think it's a good example, so it's up there. But I went in for my eye surgery, right, and they removed the outer layer of my cornea. They gave me drops to numb it, so I wasn't in pain during the procedure or anything. It only took about 10 minutes. But he clamped my eye open, and you've probably had an eye exam where you put your chin in the little machine and you put your forehead against the rest, and it's got 2 little motorcycle handles here on the side, which I was very comfortable with, so that encouraged me, right? So I'm grabbing onto that. I got my chin in there, and then he takes a scalpel and he starts scraping away, right, the outside of my eye. And again, I can't feel any pain associated with that, but because the knife blade is so close to I'm seeing the flash of light just going across every time he swipes, right? I'm feeling the pressure that he's making against my eye with every, swipe of the knife. And I'm seeing him wipe the corneal cells off on a paper towel as he, in between things. And listen, the only thing keeping my face in this machine or in this device so he can see in there is my own willpower. After he told me, don't move because I don't want to slip and slice into your eye. Thanks. So this is like 10 minutes. And this is what I said to him afterward, to he and his nurse. I said, you guys did a great job. I was never in any pain, but I was this close to freaking out. Honestly. My heart rate was elevated, and I wanted to do nothing but get out of there. So then he says, okay, when this numbing medication wears off, you're going to be in an extreme amount of pain. So you need to go downstairs. We were in Sayre. You need to go downstairs to the pharmacy, and you need to get these eye drops that have pain medication right in the eye drop so you can start applying that every 4 hours. And so we go down to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist says, yeah, we don't have that. I was the first patient that Guthrie had after the 2-month shutdown, apart from emergency things, right? So the prescription pipeline just wasn't full yet. So he gets on his computer, and he says, I can't locate any for you. That's wonderful. So we start heading back home, Michelle and I. She's driving. I'm in the passenger seat. And we get a call from him. So we're down by Chemung at this point. We get a call from him. I found some in Conklin, which is on the far side of Binghamton. So we turn around, and now we're driving to Conklin. We finally found they had the last 2 bottles in this whole southern tier. All right, so we get the 1 bottle. Now we got to drive all the way home. At this point, the numbing agent is gone, and I'm in my happy place. Right? For me, what that means is I'm not talking anymore. My communication is, are you okay? Mm-hmm. Do you need anything? Mm-mm. My eyes are closed, and so on and so forth. Now we get home, she puts the drops in, it relieves the pain, and, life was beginning to be good again. But that was 10 minutes, right? That was 2 hours. Imagine that being 10 years and the toll that would take on you. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Notice verses 4 through 9. He says, you hold my eyelids open, right? He's talking about God. He's saying, don't miss it. He's saying, it's your fault. I want to go to sleep. You're not letting me go to sleep. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever? He's searching, right, through his experience. Where does he land? Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Selah. I read this passage and I think to myself, man, pain is so painful. And not just physically. Part of what makes pain so painful is the tension that it throws us into. Right? Think about this with me. As Christians who believe in the absolute sovereignty of God, and I trust that you do believe in the absolute sovereignty of God over all things at all times, we then have to admit that whenever we hurt, it's because at some level God has allowed us to hurt. God has allowed us to hurt. And that always creates tension in us that says this: it didn't have to be this way. When I'm experiencing that chronic pain, and unrelenting, persistent pain, believing in the sovereignty of God, I have to conclude there were other options. My life didn't have to go down this path. God could have chosen a different way. And so questions tend to arise like this: why, God? Why? Or, how long, O Lord? Read through the book of Psalms and you'll see that over and over and over again. How long, O Lord? How long, O Lord? How long, O Lord? How about this one? Why me? Why me? Where do we go next? There are way worse people than me. Why me? Why this, God? Or how about this one? What did I do? What did I do to God that he would be so angry at me that he would punish me in this way? I remember when Michelle had her ectopic pregnancy, she had felt a pop in the middle of the night, and she thought she was okay. I was speaking at a men's conference. I wasn't one of the pastors here, but I was leading our men's ministry at the time, and it was at the Holiday Inn, and she said, just go, I'll be fine, it's okay. What we didn't know is she was bleeding internally that whole time, hour after hour. She was bleeding, and by the time she realized she was in a bad situation, she didn't call Airways, she called me. I came all the way back from Horseheads to pick her up and drive her to the Arnott, and she had no discernible blood pressure that they could take, and they got enough blood out of her to a single vial that they ran some tests, found out that she was pregnant. We didn't think that was possible because she'd had her tubes tied, and but the fallopian tube had burst, and she had been bleeding internally. They went and they did the emergency surgery. She was in the hospital for a handful of days, and then when I finally was able to bring her home, I'm getting her upstairs, get her everything that she needs, and I know she needs to go to sleep, and so I turn off the light, and I'm getting ready to go out the room, and so I have my back to her, and she says, Doug, what did I do? And I said, okay, well, we're going to have that conversation now. She didn't do anything. And the doctrine of propitiation says God was not mad at her in her circumstances, so it must then serve a different purpose than punishment. But those are common questions. And listen, it's possible to go so far down this path to get to such a dark place that you end up asking, is this even real? I mean, is this even real? Do I even believe this anymore? Not only does that tension put us into all these questions, but it can pull us out of the present and thrust us in a really unhelpful way into either the past or the future. For Asaph, he falls into the trap of nostalgia. You know what he says? He's like, I consider the days of old, right? The years long ago in verse 5. I just want to look back, right, at the way life used to be. And nostalgia is that belief, often false belief, that it was better before. Life was better before all of this happened. And I would argue that most of the time nostalgia is the product of some pretty selective memory, right? That it was never all that great, but we tend to forget the bad parts. We tend to focus on the good parts, and we'll say life was better before. And what giving yourself over to nostalgia does is it causes you to despise the present, like today really stinks, and it also causes you to fear the future. Like, oh my word, if this continues, my whole life is going to fall apart. And here's my questions for you. Was God not present in those days before when you thought life was so good? Yes or no? And we'd say yes. Well, is that same God also not present in these days that you think are so hard? The answer is yes. And even if the worst version of the future that in your darkest moments you can paint for yourself does actually come to pass, will God not be present in that future as well? Yes. Yes. And so that's the key, right? Chronic pain will force you to talk to you. And you'll talk to you more than anybody else talks to you. The key in chronic pain is to continue to talk to yourself until you get to God and the gospel. Keep talking until you get to God and the gospel. Notice, again, verses 10 through 15. Then I said, who's he saying this to? Himself. Just like, who was he asking these questions to? Will the Lord spurn forever? It wasn't like Asaph was going to his pastor and asking these questions. Asaph was the pastor, right? He's asking these questions to himself. He's asking these questions to his own soul. And so when he says, then I said in verse 10, then I said to myself, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wondrous deeds of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. You with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph, Selah. Asaph is careful to keep talking to himself until he gets to God. And when he considers God, what he sees is this record of divine faithfulness over the years of Israel's existence. What are these wonders of old that Asaph is meditating on and thinking on that are now encouraging his heart? I would contend that they're the plagues of Egypt, right? Culminating in Passover and God's great deliverance of the nation of Israel from their bondage under Pharaoh. I would contend he's thinking about the parting of the Red Sea, right? Where the nation of Israel found themselves trapped between a sea they couldn't cross and Pharaoh's army that was barreling down to destroy them. Moses lifts up his staff. God parts the Red Sea. They cross on dry land, and it became this watershed moment in the history of the nation of Israel. I would contend he's thinking about Sinai and God coming down on the mountain, right? And clouds and darkness and thunders and lightning, and the ground is shaking, and God speaks to the nation, right, with his voice, and they hear him, right? And he's thinking about God's presence among his people as a pillar of fire by night and cloud by day. I think he's thinking about crossing over the Jordan on dry ground as they begin the conquest of the Promised Land. I think he's thinking about the conquest of Jericho and these walls that are so high and wide, right? They're running chariots around on the top, and God says, let's bring out the band, right? And the walls fall down and they take the city. I think he's looking back on all these standing stone moments that are meant to encourage our hearts. You know what I mean by that? Standing stone moments? It's those occasions, right? Those moments in time where you see God provide, you see his faithfulness, and God says to the nation of Israel, I want you to raise up stones in this place so that when fathers and future generations pass by with their children, the children would say, Father, what is the meaning of these stones? And you could recount for your children and their children's children the wondrous deeds of God. And this is my question for you. Do you have such standing stone moments in the history of your life where you have seen and in some way memorialized the faithfulness of God? If you haven't, you better get some. You better get some. Because listen, the reality of sin in the world all but guarantees that the older you get, chronic, persistent, continuous pain will more and more mark your life. There's your good news for the day. Welcome to church. Right? Look at what Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes 12. I would encourage you to read Ecclesiastes 12, especially if you're anticipating getting older. I think most of us are. Ecclesiastes 12 gives us this amazing picture of what old age looks like. But it begins in Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, when you're young, when life is still pleasant and for the most part good. Before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. What is Solomon saying? He says, you better get in the habit of raising up some standing stones in the history of your own life, because there is going to come a day, if you live long enough, when you will regret the fact that you woke up again. Because your life will not be pleasant. Your life will be marked by consistent, persistent, ever-present pain. And you will wake up on a new day and you will moan. You'll open your eyes and you'll be like, ugh, I'm still here. But listen, I would contend that there's a tremendous amount of grace in that reality. I'll say it this way. I think it's very common for the average 25-year-old Christian to like the idea of heaven, but they don't want to go there today. Right? Because they want to get married, all that process of courtship and meeting that special someone and thinking you find the unicorn riding, at the end of the rainbow, the one, and you get married and you have your life and you have a career and you buy a house and you have children and you see them graduate and start their life and you have grandchildren and all these things happen and all that lies in front of you and you really want those experiences. So as a Christian, you're really thankful you got heaven in your back pocket, but you don't want to go today. Now fast forward to when you're 85 years old and you've been puking every day for 3 months because you've had chemo multiple times a week and radiation multiple times a week, and you definitely could get to the point where you're like, I'm just ready. I'm just ready. That's the grace of God loosening your grip on this life so that heaven doesn't just become a nice idea, but it becomes your hope, your expectation, your desire to depart this life and be with Jesus, which Paul says is far better. I can't tell you how many people I've sat in the hospital with. I've sat next to a hospital bed. I've sat in their home, their living room, or their bedroom, wherever their hospital bed might be, at the end of their life, holding their hand, talking to them, praying with them, and they look me in the eye, and with a sincere heart, they say something like, I love my family. I love the life that God has given to me. I'm just ready to go and be with Jesus. Would you pray, Pastor, that God would be merciful and take me soon? I've never had a 25-year-old ask me to pray that. So there's a grace in getting older and pain becoming a greater part of our story to prepare our hearts for heaven and giving us that greater desire to see Jesus than I would just contend most Christians have on most days. So let me say this as we move towards a conclusion. Chronic pain may not be your current reality, but if you live long enough, it probably will be. It probably will be. And what do you need to do to get yourself ready for that day on this day? What are the truths you need to bury in your heart? What are the standing stones you need to start setting up so that when the evil day comes, those days when you take no pleasure in them, you can look back and you can see the faithfulness of God and know that He's still faithful even in that hard, difficult, painful, dark last day. And then the next question is, how do you help someone who's walking through it right now? Walking through chronic pain right now. First thing I would say is, just at a high level, is you have to remember the application points from the first two messages. I'm not going to take the time to rehearse them here this morning. I would encourage you, if you haven't heard those or you don't remember them, you need to go back and watch them. They're online. You can get them again. But the gospel overcoming brokenness from 2 Corinthians 1, right, and that God will give us more than we can handle to teach us to rely on Him who raises the dead and not on ourselves, right? You need to go back and look at those things. And then the gospel overcoming trauma from a couple of weeks ago, and go back and look at those things, because the experience of chronic, persistent pain is very traumatic to the body. It's very traumatic to the mind, and the things that were true in that message are going to be true for this condition of chronic pain as well, including potentially the need to confront the person dealing with chronic pain on the way they're responding to their pain in sinful ways. Right? That wounded wolf that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. You may need to go back and redo that. But for this specific issue of chronic pain, I want to give you 5 things that you should encourage others to think about and walk through and try to build into their life as they walk through the experience of chronic pain as an overcomer. Number 1, help them learn the value of lament as they work through their grief and fear. Lament simply refers to an expression of sorrow, an expression of disappointment in the way things are versus the way you thought things were going to be. The Psalms are full of laments. You need to kill that idea that somehow you're supposed to pretend that your pain isn't actually painful. The only thing that will come from that over time is bitterness. You shaking your fist at God, God, how could you, right? You being disappointed with yourself that if you were just stronger, you'd be able to handle it better. You need to learn the value of lament and crying before the Lord. Grief over what? Grieving the loss of that dream that you thought your future was going to look like. Grieving the reality of death and grieving your own upcoming death, perhaps. That's okay. What about fear? So much fear bound up in chronic pain. Thinking about the loss of dignity. Honestly, I'll tell you, when I go into a hospital, when I go to visit someone who's struggling, one of my highest priorities when I'm there and I'm in the room is protecting their dignity. Because so much that happens at the end of a person's life strips dignity from them. I mean, just think about it. Not being able to control when you go to the bathroom. Not being able to walk. Not being able to eat and feed yourself. I remember the first time I spoon-fed my mom, and I just remember thinking, as much of an honor as it is to be able to serve her in this way because of all that she did for me, this is wrong. It just shouldn't be like this. People need to grieve the loss of their independence. So much about the experience of chronic pain that's marked by a single word. That word is loss. That loss needs to be acknowledged. It has to be acknowledged. Number 2, you need to help them avoid the ditches of obsession and surrender. Obsession is that idea when you just give yourself over to you make all of life about the cure, right? About relief, about dealing with what the rest of life shuts down, grinds to a halt. Everybody else's lives need to shut down and grind to a halt. It has to be about this one thing, right? My condition, my pain, the relief of my pain. That's the idea of giving yourself over to obsession. The idea of giving yourself over to surrender is just, well, I guess this is just the way it's going to be. I might as well give up and not even try. And listen, that's not the same as being willing to fight through your pain for a potential cure, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I remember my own mother, sitting with her in ICU rooms many times, lived in Florida, taking emergency flights, going down and seeing her and so on, and scheduling vacations around being able to visit her, and again, being in some hospitals over and over and over again, and always seeing her willing to fight, always seeing her willing to try the next treatment that was offered to her until she wasn't. And just getting to the point where she's like, Doug, I'm just ready to be with Jesus. I just can't do anymore. And then for her to say to me, please don't be disappointed in me. And how could I be? She was valiant. She was tired. That's not what I'm talking about when I say surrender. It's that unwillingness to fight, that willingness to just surrender to it and just say, this is what it is. And then thirdly, help them see the redemptive purposes of their pain. I hope that the cross convinces you that Jesus understands our pain, not just empathetically, but sympathetically. By empathetically, I mean, he doesn't just say, well, boy, I stubbed my toe before, so I know it's painful when you stub your toe. That really stinks for you, sorry, and he walks away. That's empathy, right? I've been through what you're going through. I know that's hard. He understands our pain sympathetically, meaning I know that pain hurts. I know what you're going through is hard, and I'd sympathize with you in it, meaning I will come and I will deliver you from that hardship. But listen, here's what you got to make peace with. He loves us too much than to relieve our pain and suffering before it has accomplished all of his divine purposes. Because if he were just to relieve it because we ask him to, then that pain that we've already experienced would be wasted pain, and he's not going to waste our pain. And so he makes us stay in it until he has redeemed everything from it that he has designed into it. To do otherwise would be unloving. Notice what Job says. Job serves as, in some ways, a really good example of what it looks like to live with a chronic condition, but also a poor example. But he says this in Job 23, verses 8 through 10. Behold, I go forward, but he is not there. Now, Job is struggling because, of course, God was there. But he doesn't have a sense of God's presence. And backward, but I do not perceive him. On the left hand, when he is working, I do not behold him. I know he's doing something over here, but I can't tell what it is. He turns to the right hand, but I don't see him. But he knows the way that I take, and when he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. I just love that idea, right? What Job is admitting to is, I don't understand what God is doing. I don't know what God is doing, but he knows me. And I believe that when this is all over, something good is going to come from it. So Job wrestled, but he kept talking to himself until he got back to God and the character of God and the promises of God, and he knew that God would in some way, somehow, at some time, redeem his pain for God's glory and his good. And you need to help people see that that's what God is doing. Number 4, help them learn to love and serve people in their pain. Now, the person's chronic condition is going to impact exactly what that looks like, but one of the most helpful things a person can do when they're struggling through a chronic condition is to take their eyes off of themselves, right? Stop looking at their belly, stop looking at their feet, pick their head up, realize there are hurting people all around them, maybe to different degrees, maybe in different ways, but God has given you spiritual abilities and natural gifts in order to encourage and serve them even in your pain, and doing it even in your pain can shout a greater testimony to them of God's faithfulness than anything else you could do. And so for some, that may look like phone calls. For others, that may look like sending birthday cards, Christmas cards, thinking of you cards. For some people, that may look like a prayer ministry where you just, how can I pray for you? For some people, it may be making things. I see the Davises here. Florence Saunders used to make blankets. When she was struggling, when she was in pain, she'd make blankets and give to people as just tokens of her love and appreciation for them, and that she was thinking of them to encourage them. She made my mom a blanket, and I was able to take it down to her. They'd never met. They've met now. They're in heaven. They're having a wonderful day together. And then my mom, right? We're about 2 weeks away from welcoming our third grandchild, our first granddaughter, into this world, and Peyton already has burp claws and baby claws and all that stuff from my mom, even though my mom passed away 2 years ago and never had an idea that Peyton would ever exist, but she got ready. Love and serve other people even in your struggle. And then number 5, help them look ahead to a time when there will be no more pain. I love the book of Revelation for a lot of different reasons, but Revelation 21, 3 through 4, this is what people dealing with chronic pain, they need to celebrate this, they need to get this into their heart. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, this is the Father seated on the throne. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. Notice what this God is going to do in verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And this is what we celebrate in the presence of chronic, persistent pain, is that all of these current things one day are going to become former things. One day, all these things that trouble us, one day, all these things that just drive us to our knees and call us to cry out and to weep and to praise God through tears, one day these things are going to be fading memories as we stand before God and the glory of God in his Christ, and we rejoice in him over how he has redeemed all these things we're going through right now. And listen, I guarantee you, on that day, you will be glad. And on that day, part of your gladness is going to be rooted in, I get it now. I see it. It makes sense. I didn't see it then. I didn't like it then. I didn't want it then, but I'm so thankful for it now. As you see how God fully redeemed every hard thing you ever went through for his glory and your good and the good of others around you. I said a little while ago, I was raised by a woman who was in pain most of the days of her life, honestly, for as long as I can remember, even as a small child. By the time she went to be with the Lord, she had suffered through 3 different kinds of cancer: breast cancer, rectal cancer, and then leukemia, basically blood or bone cancer. She had a colostomy, so she had a colostomy. She had drains in both kidneys. She was on oxygen constantly, and she had both her legs amputated at various points along the way. The one she waited much too long to have amputated, and caused her all kinds of pain and infection along the way. And this is what I can say to you. None of that beat her. Now, pneumonia related to her leukemia ultimately took her life, but that doesn't mean she lost her battle with anything. She crossed that threshold of death like a champion, with her head up. Even though along the way she'd say things to me, she'd say, "Dougie, I give it to the Lord," and then a minute later I take it right back. "I know, Mom. It's okay. He understands. If you give it to him 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, he'll take it every time." None of that beat her. And I can say to you, I don't say this flippantly. I say this with a sincere heart. She's having a great day. And I know this. One day I'm going to see her whole. One day I'm going to see her pain-free. And she, like the rest of us, will dance and rejoice before the throne of God on 2 good legs, right? You know what Revelation 21:5 says? It's God speaking. God says, "Behold." You know what that means, right? Look with wonder and amazement. Look at this awesome thing. You know what comes next? "I make all things" what? New. I make all things new. So listen, here's the reality. If you're in Christ Jesus this morning, eventually, all our pain will cease. And eventually, in one way or another, we all get healed. Because he makes all things new.